The marketplace in Glenmere buzzed beneath the pale spring sun when a sleek, black sedan braked to a halt. Its polished chrome reflected rows of skeptical faces as the crowd hushed. Grace Hart, now in her late 40s, froze where she stood. For 2 decades, she had carried the burden of suspicion, whispers, and loneliness. Yet, as the car door opened, the silence became heavy enough to bend the air. From within stepped a tall man in a tailored suit, his dark eyes brimming with recognition. Behind him followed a young woman, her stride confident but her gaze tender. Shoppers leaned forward, curiosity displacing judgment. The figures walked directly toward Grace, each step cutting through years of disdain. In that instant, the cold weight of memory crashed open, pulling her back to the bitter winter when everything began, 20 years earlier, in a small diner beside the bus stop. The diner was a modest refuge on Glenmere's frozen edge, its windows fogged with condensation from simmering broth. Snow piled against the doors as Grace Hart wiped down the counter, her breath clouding faintly in the chilly air. That night, the wind forced open the door, carrying with it 2 children wrapped in despair. A boy of 13 with sharp, watchful eyes clutched his sister close, shielding her tiny frame with a jacket torn at the shoulder. The girl wore no shoes, her thin hoodie soaked through, her lips nearly blue. For a moment, silence consumed the diner as the few patrons turned away, unwilling to intervene. Grace felt a pull stronger than fear of rules or consequences. She reached for the ladle, filled a bowl of chicken soup, and placed slices of toasted bread beside it. The gesture was small, but in that cold night, it became an act of defiance.
The children slid onto red vinyl stools, their bodies stiff with mistrust, yet hunger left them no choice. The boy tore the bread in half, pressing the larger piece into his sister's trembling hands. She whispered that it was warm, her voice a fragile reminder that warmth could mean more than heat. It meant recognition in a world that had forgotten them. Grace lingered nearby, her own hands shaking, aware she had broken the restaurant's policy. She knew the consequences, but the sight of their cautious bites burned deeper than fear. A simple meal was a lifeline. For a moment, the wind outside howled against the glass, but inside that diner, a fragile pocket of humanity resisted the storm. Grace etched their faces into memory, certain this night would linger far longer than her shift. She didn't yet know how heavy that memory would one day become. Over the following nights, Grace found herself drawn back to the same quiet corner. The children returned when the world slept, shadows in threadbare clothing. She carried out small paper bags of leftovers, slices of bread, bruised fruit, bowls of soup hurriedly disguised as discarded meals. Each package was prepared with the same care she gave paying customers, sometimes more. She never asked questions, for questions were heavy, and their eyes carried enough weight already. One evening, the little girl pressed a folded handkerchief into Grace's hand. It was frayed, embroidered with a crooked initial, the last token of a mother now gone. Grace smoothed its fabric as though it were silk, promising herself she would guard it forever. That single piece of cloth transformed from a child's keepsake into a quiet covenant, a pledge that her kindness would not fade, no matter what price she would later be forced to pay. From the mezzanine above, Victoria Hale, the assistant manager, observed with cold detachment. Her life revolved around ambition polished into perfection. Tight dresses, measured smiles, and carefully manufactured approval. She despised the way regular patrons greeted Grace by name, as though affection could replace status. When her eyes caught Grace bending at the back door, offering food to nameless children, jealousy fermented into venom. To Victoria, kindness was not virtue, but competition, a threat to her carefully built facade. Her phone became a weapon. The lens captured Grace crouched in the snow, placing food by the alley wall. No children appeared in the frame, only a suspicious act, stripped of its heart. Victoria crafted the story before it was even told. Theft disguised as charity, waste recast as mismanagement. In her hands, Grace's compassion was twisted into evidence. an image sharp enough to cut through a career built on sincerity. The dismissal came swift and cold. Charles Whitaker, owner of the Golden Fork, watched the video with disapproval, his judgment final. Grace stood silent as her apron was taken, the warmth of years of service replaced by the chill of accusation. She walked out into the snow, the weight of betrayal heavier than the storm pressing on her shoulders. Behind her, Victoria's whisper of triumph followed like a shadow. Yet Grace felt no shame in the act that condemned her. She thought of the children, their frail hands wrapped around bread, the girl's faint smile when she whispered of warmth. Grace knew she had done right, though the world refused to see it. That night, her mother Elaine waited at home, knitting by lamplight. She reminded Grace with quiet words that one candle can still defy darkness. Grace tucked the handkerchief into a small box, unaware it would one day save her.
In the weeks that followed, Grace searched tirelessly for new work. With nearly a decade of experience, she should have been welcomed anywhere, yet doors closed one after another. Smiles faded when her name was recognized. Interviews ended with hollow promises that never called back. Rumors spread faster than the truth. In Glenmuir's cafes and markets, whispers grew that she had stolen food, exploited pity, or acted out of pride. Grace felt the town's gaze turn colder with each passing day. Even kindness she had once extended to neighbors was returned with suspicion. The streets she had walked her entire life became corridors of quiet rejection. Yet in the solitude of her apartment, her mother reminded her that survival often meant holding on to dignity when nothing else remained. Grace clung to the handkerchief like a compass, its worn threads guiding her through the fog of shame. When every door closed, Grace turned inward, shaping her pain into purpose. She rented a corner in a crumbling laundromat, its cracked tiles and broken windows forgotten by the world. With a bucket of paint, a few secondhand chairs, and her bare hands, she built something new. She called it Good Spoon. The menu was humble, soup and bread, but it carried the weight of everything she had lost and everything she still believed. She charged nothing to those who couldn't pay, asking only that they share in dignity. Word spread among the unseen: weary workers, homeless wanderers, children with hollow eyes. Good Spoon became more than a kitchen. It was a hearth where the forgotten could sit in warmth. On the wall, Grace framed two treasures side by side: her mother's photo and the handkerchief from Ava. They reminded her that small kindness could outlast the cruelest winters.
For years, Good Spoon survived through little more than perseverance and scraps of generosity. Neighbors donated vegetables from their gardens. Old men mended broken chairs. Mothers swept the floor after meals. Grace worked from dawn until the lamps burned low, her hair streaked with exhaustion, but her eyes unwavering. She did not keep ledgers of profit. Her only measure was the warmth of full bellies and softened gazes. Children who had once lined up barefoot began returning with coins or candy to share, their small offerings greater than wealth. In those quiet exchanges, Grace found strength. Yet, shadows still loomed. Victoria Hale had built her own empire of restaurants across the region, polished with media praise and hollow philanthropy. To her, Grace's modest haven was an irritant, proof that kindness could outshine grandeur. The storm that once ended Grace's career was gathering again, sharper and more ruthless than before. The attack came not with fire, but with rumor sharpened into a blade. Online forums lit up with accusations. Good Spoon was unsanitary. Grace had a history of theft. Her charity masked corruption. Hashtags spread across platforms, fueled by anonymous accounts and planted whispers.
Health inspectors arrived unannounced, scrutinizing every jar, every napkin, every floorboard. They found nothing damning, but public pressure demanded action. A suspension notice was taped to the door, sealing the small kitchen that had become a lifeline for so many. Cameras lingered outside, capturing images of Grace through glass, her hands pressed against a counter she could no longer use. Neighbors who once ate at her tables now crossed the street to avoid her eyes. The same silence that fell in the diner years ago returned, heavier, colder. Grace felt history repeat, but this time, the wound threatened to end everything she had rebuilt.
Grace's fall rippled quickly through Glenmere. 3 blows landed in quick succession. First, a local supplier who had donated bread weekly pulled away, citing reputation concerns. Next, her landlord sent a warning letter. Closure of Goodspoon might trigger termination of her lease. Finally, her bank froze her small community fund, fearing association with scandal. Each strike cut deeper than hunger. The neighborhood grew tense. Where once hungry families lined up, now suspicion kept them away. Grace worked in silence, cleaning a kitchen she could no longer open, polishing silver she could not set out. At night, she stared at the handkerchief framed on the wall, its stitches fraying with time yet stronger than any rumor. She remembered Ava's small voice decades ago, whispering of warmth. In that fragile memory, she found enough strength to resist despair, though the storm pressing against her life grew heavier each day. Victoria Hale, now owner of a glossy chain of restaurants, watched the chaos unfold with satisfaction. To her, Glenmere's sympathy for Grace had always been a thorn. She had built her image with tailored speeches and charity galas, yet people still whispered about the waitress who once gave away a bowl of soup. Envy had hardened into obsession. She had fed the rumor mill, planted seeds online, and pushed whispers through back channels until Goodspoon collapsed. In her luxury office, she rehearsed the narrative. Grace was careless, unprofessional, unworthy of admiration. Victoria posed for magazines with awards pinned to her name, smiling as though compassion had always been hers. But in quiet moments, her eyes flickered with fear. Deep down, she knew that one act of unrecorded kindness could undo years of manufactured perfection. She vowed never to allow that light to shine again, no matter the cost.
Grace withdrew into stillness, carrying the weight of her community's silence. Yet even in the wreckage, faint glimmers remained. One evening, a neighbor slipped a bundle of fresh vegetables by her door without a word. Another day, a child left a note in crooked handwriting, reminding her of the chocolate cake she once baked. Tucked beside the note were a few coins and a peppermint candy. Grace held the tiny offering in her palm for a long time, as though it were gold. She understood that kindness does not vanish. It hides, waiting for courage to lift it again. Her body weakened under strain, her health worn by sleepless nights, but her spirit refused to break. Each evening, she lit a single candle beside her mother's photo, whispering the old promise Elaine once gave. The way out of darkness is always through the flame of small kindness. One stormy evening, Grace discovered footprints near the back entrance of Goodspoon. They were fresh, pressed into melting snow, leading toward the alley. Her heart quickened. For days she had suspected intrusions, tools misplaced, locks shifted slightly. This time she followed, tracing the path toward a side street where shadows loitered. A flicker of recognition struck her. The bulky frame of Victor Nolan, the chef once aligned with Victoria, moving hurriedly under the cover of rain. He carried a small container, glancing over his shoulder before vanishing. Grace's suspicion grew sharper. Sabotage had not been rumor. It was real, deliberate, calculated. She began documenting each trace: disturbed boxes, chemical scents near the drain, strange markings on pipes. Quietly, she confided in Walter Briggs, her loyal neighbor, who urged her to gather proof.
Grace felt a fire rekindled within her. For the first time, she was no longer simply enduring.
Walter Briggs helped her secure a small surveillance camera from a bodega owner nearby. Together they fixed it above Goodspoon's rear entrance, angled toward the alley. For days, the lens blinked silently, capturing shadows that passed in the night. Grace busied herself in the closed cafe, wiping tables though no one sat there, boiling soup she dared not serve. Her eyes flicked often to the camera light, waiting. Then one dawn she found what she needed. The footage revealed victim Nolan crouched by the pipes, pouring a dark liquid into the drain. His face, partially obscured, was unmistakable. The date stamped clearly matched the night before inspectors claimed to find irregularities. Grace clutched the recording as though it were a lifeline. She had endured years of lies and loss, but now the truth rested in her hands. At last there was proof sharp enough to cut through silence. Word of the footage reached Daniel Harper, the district attorney, through Walter's quiet channels. Harper had lived in Glenmere his entire life and remembered whispers of Grace's firing 2 decades earlier. His own sister had once eaten at Good Spoon, grateful for the meals. That personal thread gave him reason to act swiftly. He convened investigators, gathering bank records, rental agreements, and communication logs. Soon they uncovered a trail, emails from Victoria Hale to Victor Nolan, messages about closing her down for good. Harper's team pieced together the pattern. Deliberate sabotage, hidden beneath false philanthropy. Grace was asked to appear at the upcoming town hall, not as an accused, but as a witness. For the first time in years, she felt her voice mattered. The handkerchief Ava had once pressed into her palm no longer felt like memory. It felt like prophecy waiting to be fulfilled in truth.
The night before the town hall hearing, Grace sat in her dim apartment surrounded by keepsakes. Elaine's old knitting lay folded on the chair, her mother's scent lingering faintly on the wool. The handkerchief rested in its frame, and beside it hung Ava's childhood drawing, weathered yet alive with memory. Grace thought of Caleb and Ava, the 2 children she had never stopped searching for in faces on the street. Were they alive? Did they remember? Did they know how much that single moment in the diner had shaped her life? Rain tapped against the glass as she prepared her testimony. She was not seeking revenge. She wanted only the truth, so that her years of quiet labor would not be remembered as deceit. Her heart beat heavy with fear, but beneath it ran an unshakable calm. She had already endured the worst. The morning would bring light. At Glenmere's marketplace the following morning, Grace carried her groceries home, her head bowed beneath the weight of suspicion still hanging over her. The crowd's whispers sliced sharper than wind. Then, in an instant, silence fell. A sleek black sedan rolled to a stop, its brakes whispering across the cobblestones. Grace lifted her eyes. From the car stepped a man, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed, his gaze fixed on her with a warmth she could not place. A young woman followed, her features strikingly familiar. The crowd's murmurs softened into stunned curiosity. As the pair approached, Grace felt time fold back on itself. Their faces overlapped with 2 children she had once held in memory, barefoot in the snow, clinging to a bowl of soup. The past and present collided in that square, and the story she thought long buried rose once more to the surface. The embrace was wordless, yet its meaning thundered through Glenmere. Caleb Walker, once the boy who shielded his sister with a torn jacket, now held Grace firmly, no longer frail, but powerful. Beside him stood Ava, no longer a barefoot child, but a poised young woman whose eyes still carried the tenderness of that winter night. Onlookers who had doubted Grace stared in silence as the 3 clung together, bound by memory. For Grace, the moment shattered years of isolation. She felt the weight of falsehood lift, replaced by the undeniable presence of living proof. The marketplace, once filled with whispers, now held a quiet respect. The handkerchief, long preserved as her only link to the children, was returned through flesh and bone. The act that had cost her everything now bore fruit in the form of gratitude too deep for words, visible in every tear and every trembling hand. Later that afternoon, Glenmuir's town hall filled beyond capacity. Reporters from nearby cities crowded beside local residents, eager for a story that had already begun spreading online. Cameras lined the back wall, lenses trained on the podium. Grace sat in the front row, Walter Briggs by her side, her hands folded tightly around the handkerchief. Across the aisle, Victoria Hale sat poised, her expression stiff, though a glimmer of unease betrayed her calm. Caleb and Ava stood ready near the stage, prepared to speak for the woman who once spoke for them through action alone. The air buzzed with expectation. Truth was about to face rumor in the open. Grace breathed deeply, steadying herself. For 2 decades, she had carried injustice in silence. Now the silence would be broken, not by her own voice alone, but by those she once saved. Vindication was finally within reach. Caleb approached the podium, his voice steady, yet rich with the weight of memory. He introduced himself and Ava, recounting the night when 2 children, nearly frozen, slipped into a diner and received more than food. He told of warmth given quietly, of dignity offered when the world turned away. His words cut through the crowd like sunlight breaking fog. The audience listened, many shifting uncomfortably, remembering their own silence back then. Ava stepped forward, holding up a small painting she had created, a woman kneeling in snow, handing bread to 2 children. Cameras clicked, flashes lighting the hall as the truth became undeniable. Grace, seated in the front row, fought tears as she saw her act immortalized in color. The air grew heavier. The narrative of theft and deceit trembled against the force of living testimony, preparing to collapse beneath the weight of undeniable gratitude. The screen lowered, and footage from the hidden surveillance camera played across the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Victor Nolan appeared on film, crouched by Goodspoon's pipes, pouring a dark substance into the drains. The date glared at the corner of the frame, matching the very night inspectors found supposed irregularities. Daniel Harper, the district attorney, stepped forward, presenting files that traced the scheme to Victoria Hale. Emails, text messages, even bank transfers, proof of deliberate sabotage designed to crush Grace. Murmurs surged into anger. Reporters swarmed with questions, the crowd restless with outrage. Grace sat motionless, her hands trembling, but her gaze calm. For years she had been accused without evidence. Now her innocence was proven in front of the very town that once cast her out. The weight she carried alone had shifted at last onto the shoulders of those who betrayed her.
All eyes turned toward Victoria Hale, her perfect composure fractured under the glaring lights. She rose, her chair clattering to the floor, and shouted that the evidence was fabricated. Her voice climbed higher, shriller, until it cracked into a confession disguised as accusation. She spat venom at Grace, admitting envy, resenting every moment Grace had been admired for kindness while she clawed for recognition. She revealed the bitterness that had consumed her since those quiet nights at Golden Fork, confessing to hating the respect Grace received for doing nothing. The hall erupted, her words sealing her downfall more thoroughly than any file of evidence. Victoria's eyes darted, searching for escape, but security closed in. Cameras captured every frame, her mask torn away by her own voice. For once, Grace did not flinch. She simply sat in silence, dignity radiating more powerfully than any rebuttal could ever achieve. As Victoria was escorted out, her shouts faded into echoes drowned by the murmurs of the crowd. Daniel Harper announced formal charges: criminal sabotage, defamation, and unlawful competitive practices. The room buzzed with a new energy,
anger at the injustice, awe at the reversal. Grace remained still, her quiet presence commanding more attention than any outburst could. Caleb and Ava returned to her side, one on each arm, symbols of truth standing tall. Reporters angled microphones toward them, demanding statements. Caleb spoke plainly. The world owed its future not to corporations or polished speeches, but to the unnoticed acts of compassion that kept people alive. Ava added that Good Spoon was never just a diner. It was proof that love could survive even betrayal. The words pierced deeper than the scandal itself. Glenmere, once cold to Grace, now watched with eyes heavy not with suspicion but with guilt.
News of the town hall spread like wildfire. National outlets picked up the story. Waitress once fired for kindness, vindicated after 20 years. Headlines carried images of Grace flanked by Caleb and Ava, the painting held high as living testimony. Across television screens and social media feeds, the handkerchief and artwork became symbols of resilience. Messages of apology poured in, from strangers, from locals who had once turned away, even from former colleagues. Grace remained humble, declining interviews, speaking only when pressed that kindness needs no spotlight. Yet her silence only amplified the message. Donations began to flood in for Good Spoon. Architects offered free renovation plans. Suppliers pledged steady support. Volunteers lined up to serve. What had been a place of suspicion just weeks earlier was being reborn before her eyes. For the first time, Glenmere looked at Grace not with doubt, but with reverence. Grace reopened Good Spoon in a space transformed. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, the kitchen pulsed with new equipment, and long communal tables stretched across the floor. Yet the soul remained the same, a framed photo of her mother Elaine and the faded handkerchief Ava once gave, placed prominently where all could see. On opening day, the line extended down the block. Former patrons, new supporters, and many who had once doubted her, now returning in shame and hope. Grace ladled soup with the same steady care as years ago, never pausing to judge those who came. Caleb and Ava stood beside her, serving meals as though reclaiming their childhood memory. Cameras filmed, yet Grace did not look into them. Her focus was on the faces before her, because she knew true vindication was not headlines, but the silent relief of hunger eased and dignity restored.
In the months that followed, Good Spoon evolved into more than a diner. With Caleb's business acumen and Ava's artistry, the place became a community hub. Workshops taught job skills, art classes gave children an outlet, and nightly meals ensured no one in Glenmere went hungry. Grace often stood in the background, wiping tables or stirring pots, content to let others lead. She watched as laughter filled the hall where once silence reigned. A mural painted by Ava stretched across one wall, 3 figures in snow, a bowl of soup glowing like fire in the night. Beneath it was inscribed a simple phrase, "Kindness does not forget." Grace touched the wall often, feeling her story carved into the town itself. Her quiet resilience had become part of Glenmere's foundation, a reminder that even the smallest acts could reshape the destiny of many. One evening, Grace found herself alone in the kitchen, the crowd gone, only faint echoes of laughter lingering in the air. She opened the wooden box that had held the handkerchief all those years. She traced the threads, now nearly undone with time, but stronger in meaning than ever before. She remembered Elaine's words, "The way out of darkness is to light a candle." Tonight, the room itself was filled with hundreds of candles in the form of people touched by her kindness. She smiled softly, realizing she had lived not for recognition but for this. The ripple of goodness passed forward. The bitterness of years, the weight of false accusations, and the sting of rejection had all led here. In the quiet, she whispered a promise to herself. She would keep giving, even if the world once again turned away. For that was her only true wealth.
Grace's vindication reached far beyond Glenmere. Universities invited her to speak about resilience. Churches cited her as proof of faith in action, and charities asked her to lend her story as inspiration. She politely declined most invitations, choosing instead to remain in her small kitchen, apron tied, ladle in hand. She understood that her story was not about stages or applause. It was about Caleb and Ava, now grown, who once shivered in the snow and now stood as living evidence of hope restored. It was about neighbors who rediscovered compassion through her endurance. And it was about herself, learning that the truest victories come not with triumph, but with survival, not with wealth, but with staying kind when the world demands bitterness. Grace had lost nearly everything, yet in losing it all, she had gained what mattered most, a legacy no rumor could erase. Years later, as spring returned to Glenmere, Grace walked through the marketplace where her story had turned. The square bustled with life, children running between stalls, vendors laughing, strangers greeting one another warmly. She paused where the sedan had once stopped, where Caleb and Ava had embraced her before stunned onlookers. The memory rose like sunlight after frost. She closed her eyes, feeling the wind brush past her face. But this time it was not bitter. It was soft, alive, forgiving. In her heart the words echoed, "Kindness does not vanish. It waits, it survives, and it returns, multiplied through those who once received it." Grace turned toward Goodspoon, its doors wide open, laughter spilling into the street. She stepped inside, not as a woman vindicated, but as one who had always known the truth. Kindness had never failed her. It had simply taken 20 years to bloom.